Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tualatin City Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, August 24th, 2022. We're going to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would all please rise and join me in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is the roll call. We want to excuse Commissioners Dunn and Smith. But here we have Commissioner Hammer.
Here.
Commissioner Gochis.
Present.
Commissioner Sloan. Here. Commissioner Hamilton. Here. Commissioner Jensen. Here. I'm Chairman Robinson, and I too am present. We also recognize Mr. Bolser, Mr. Agard, Mr. Hanson, Mr. Baker from the city, and council members Manzione and Hanson. Thank you all for being here as well. Next on the agenda, public hearing on the conditional use permit request by Sarah Bennett to operate a home-based daycare business at approximately 146 West, 2100 North in an R1 to 8 residential zoning district. Mr. Agard.
Thank you, Commissioners. This application involves the residential home located at the corner of the intersection of 130 West, 2100 North. The property is highlighted in red on the aerial photograph, and as you can see is surrounded by other similar homes and uses. As mentioned, the property is zoned R18 residential, as are all of the properties in the immediate surrounding area. The applicant is requesting approval of a conditional use permit to authorize a child preschool business involving the care of 8 to 16 children in the home. The applicant's business will include the instruction of 8 children and will involve one session between the hours of 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The largest concern involved with any home-based preschool or daycare of this potential size is traffic, and the ordinance requires that the applicant provide a traffic plan. The applicant has provided a traffic plan that demonstrates there is sufficient frontage adjacent to her property, as well as in her driveway to accommodate approximately 10 parked cars, more than sufficient for 8 children. And this is assuming all of the parents are driving to the site. The chances are good that some clients could actually live in the neighborhood and will walk to the home. So in either case, staff is confident that the pickup and drop-off associated with this afternoon preschool will not cause any significant problems for neighboring property owners. This is a corner lot and is imperative for safety at the intersection that the 40-foot clear view zone at the corner be preserved. Staff has added a condition that the applicant use temporary measures such as, traffic cones or something else just to mark off that 40-foot clear view zone and instruct her clients not to park in this area, just to make sure that the corner visibility is preserved for safety purposes. This item is a public hearing, and notices were sent to property owners within 200 feet of the applicant's property. Staff did receive one comment. That comment was forwarded to the Planning Commission from a Laura Allen, who expressed support for the conditional use permit. Other than that, staff has not received any comments or concerns from any of those living within the noticing radius. So if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them for you.
Thank you, Mr. Agard. Any questions for staff on this agenda item?
I have a question, Commissioner.
Commissioner Gochis.
You indicated that the traffic study was sufficient for the current request of 8, or did it also include the expansion if she were to expand to 16?
Just 8.
Okay. And so what happens if she wants to expand? Does she need to come back to the Planning Commission and request to expand her business, or is that an automatic?
Well, the conditional use permit authorizes 8 to 16, so technically she could expand without any amendments to the conditional use permit. You'll notice on the traffic plan, however, there is also a lot of frontage extending further down the street, so she does have room to accommodate more drop-off and pickup if she decided to expand that business.
Okay.
So we think she can handle that.
Right. I had one more question, if that's okay. I wondered if she needs to abide by health department codes, and if that is something that Tualatin City works in concert with.
That would come through the building or the business licensing and the license inspections that are issued there.
Okay.
But yeah, she would need to comply with those.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, this item does require a public hearing. We'll open up the public hearing. If there's anyone here that would like to address this, they may now come forward to the rostrum and speak to the matter.
It's my business, and I'm just excited. And I don't plan on expanding beyond 8 students per session. Eventually, I'd like to have multiple sessions, but that's in the far distant future. So right now, it'll just be 8 students, and one of them is mine. So I only have 7 students that don't live in my home that are coming. So,
Okay.
yeah. And if you have any other questions, I'm here.
Commissioner, I had a question. That's okay?
We wait until after the public hearing. If you hold on,
Okay.
Mrs. Bennett. Ms. Bennett, is that right?
Yes.
We'll close the public hearing, and then any commissioners that have questions for you will handle those.
Okay.
And if you wouldn't mind, when we're all through, if you would sign the roster up here.
Okay.
We're all done. Okay. Does anyone else want to come forward and address this? If not, we will close the public hearing, and since you're the applicant, we'll let Commissioner Goches fire a question at you, if you're
Okay.
okay with that.
Yeah.
My packet indicated that you have fencing in the rear of your property, and the map that you provided had like marker driven around it, and so I couldn't tell if you have side fencing. Are you a secured property with fence around the perimeter?
The backyard is completely fenced in. The
Okay.
front yard is not.
Perfect. That was just one question I had for you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for the applicant from the commission? Thank you, Ms. Bennett, very much.
You just want me to say?
Please. Any other questions, concerns, comments from the commissioners on this item? If not, I will entertain a motion on this.
I'll go ahead and do that.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Mr. Chair, I move we approve the conditional use permit by, hold on, I'm in the wrong one. I'm jumping ahead of myself.
Sarah Bennett.
Okay. I move we approve the conditional use permit by Sarah Bennett to authorize a child preschool involving 8 to 16 children in the home located at 146 West, 2100 North, application number P22-931, based on the findings and subject to the conditions listed in the staff report dated August 16, 2022. And I'd like to add 2 other conditions that should follow all state and city code involving a daycare or preschool facility.
I'll second.
There's a motion to approve by Commissioner Hamilton, seconded by Commissioner Hammer. Any discussion on that motion? If not, we'll take it to a vote. Commissioner Hammer.
Aye.
Commissioner Goches.
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan. Aye. Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Jensen.
Aye.
Chair also votes aye. That passes 6-0. Next on the agenda, public hearing and decision on a conditional use permit request by Chris Pasker of PGAW Architects to permit cultural activities and private educational facilities in an existing structure at 310 South Main. Mr. Agard.
Thank you, Commissioners. This conditional use permit request involves the existing commercial structure. As you can see, it's located west of Main Street, east of 50 West, and north of 400, that's 400 South. I don't know why I put 400 West on there, but that's 400 South. And is highlighted in red on the aerial map. Those of us that have been around Tooele for a while, we would remember this building as the sports mecca. I used to play racquetball and lift weights in that building back in my teenage years. So it's been around a while, and it's good to see something happening with it. The property is zoned MUG, mixed use general, as are properties to the north, to the east, and then to the south. And then to the west, we have some R17 residential zoning. This is a mixed use zone, so there's a mix of all kinds of uses in the area. We have some commercial and residential scattered all throughout the area. The applicant, Boys and Girls Club, is requesting a conditional use permit to authorize the use of the building for a gathering place for youth where they can play games, receive instruction, counseling, and just hang out, along with the other myriad other uses. The conditional use permit request involves 2 uses: cultural activities and uses, and private educational facility. Staff suggested both of these uses to cover the wide range of activities that could occur at the facility. The applicant did provide a site plan to show some improvements to the landscaping. The site plan was in color when they gave it to me. I scanned it in 5 times and it kept going in black and white. So there it is, but the site plan actually was in color. They're just proposing some improvements to the landscaping, no changes to the site plan, no expansions to the building. Everything that is there will remain as is. You'll note that there are 36 parking stalls available in the parking lot to the north. However, that's not all likely to be utilized, as most of the children that frequent this site don't drive cars and are either picked up or dropped off. So Parking's not necessarily a concern. They have sufficient parking there to satisfy what the facility is going to generate. The applicant's architect did provide some perspectives of the building and what they hope to do with that as they continue on with their renovations. There were some additional graphics that I included in your packet for your information. The item is a public hearing, and notices were sent to property owners within 200 feet of the subject property. We have not received any comments or concerns from those within the noticing radius at this point. And staff's recommending approval with the conditions that the improvements adhere, or that the remodeling and renovations to the building adhere to building and fire codes, which they will automatically anyway. So if you have any questions, happy to answer those for you.
Thank you, Mr. Agard. Any questions for staff from the commission on this item? Hearing none, this does indeed require a public hearing, so we'll open up the public hearing. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to come forward and address this agenda item, now is your chance.
Hi, thank you. My name is Amanda Hughes. I'm the president and CEO of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Salt Lake and the Tooele Boys and Girls Clubs as part of our organization. We're really excited for this project. As many of you know, we've been operating our youth development programs after school and all day on summer in Tooele City for over 20 years. Thousands of youth have gone through our programs, and we look forward to being in Tooele and serving our kids and families for another 20 to 40 to 50 years, even longer. This building allows us to have a permanent home that is ours, the one sole use. Right now, we've been operating for those 20 years in buildings that the city currently owns, the Dow James Building and the old skating rink on 7th North. Those buildings are seeing increasing demands from other groups in Tooele and no longer fit the needs of our growing population, of our kids and our families, and the needs of what it takes to really do comprehensive youth development programs. And so we're really excited to do some innovation or renovations on the interior of the building to make it accommodate those needs on all three levels, and to be able to serve upwards of 300 kids a day will give this expanded capacity as we continue to grow and recruit. So we look forward to making those changes and with the approval of the commission and seek your support in this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes. Would you mind signing the roster up here as well, please? Does anyone else want to come forward and address this item?
We have a whole crew here.
Here's your chance.
Hi, I'm Teresa Poland. I'm a parent, a grandparent now. My kids have been going since, 20 years almost. And to see this group so excited, I watch them every day, so excited that this is a new opportunity for them. The staff, the kids, they brought it up to the kids, and this is awesome. I can't. And then they also do, if the kids can't afford it, they also do scholarships for the kids. So, and like they said, maybe, with the expansion of all the new homes and kids coming in, so.
Thank you, Ms. Bolin. Anyone else? I have 3 minutes of YouTube fame.
Let me bring this down just a little bit. My name is Desiree McGinty. I am a staff member with Tooele Boys and Girls Club, been there almost 3 years. But I'm also a mother of club members. I just want to say that without Boys and Girls Club, as a single mother, I wouldn't be standing here right now. So I'm a little emotional, so it's really exciting for us. It's exciting for our kids to actually have a permanent home for us. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McGinty.
Okay, I'm Jenny Madrid. I'm a parent. I've had 5 kids go through the Boys and Girls Club. I didn't want to come up here because I was going to cry. So I just wanted to express how excited I am for them. I'm still sad at the same time because we literally bought our house because it was right next to the teen center. Now you guys are moving on me. But I just want to say how grateful I am for them. They've done a lot for the kids. They not only, go play kickball and learn things. We were just talking about tie-dyeing, but they also do quite a bit of community service. They also get to visit places like the mayor's office, you know, and do different field trips like that that gives him exposure that I didn't have when I was young. So just wanted to come up and say how excited I am for them and how disappointed at the same time too.
Thank you, Ms. Madrid. Anyone else?
So I'm Chris Pasker with PGAW Architects, and I've been involved with the Boys and Girls Club for over 40 years. I firsthand seen what it does, and so I'm, it's a great opportunity for me to, continue to help and develop this building and, for the betterment of these kids. And so the other reason I came here is just in case you as the Planning Commission have any questions on, kind of what some of the renovations that we're planning and such. So I'm here to answer those questions as well.
Thank you, Mr. Pasker.
My name is Angela Gorge, and I'm super nervous. I can talk in front of 100 kids very easily, but in front of adults, I'm shaken. So I have been the program director at I've worked at the Tooele Boys and Girls Club for 18 years. I am at that building every single day with our kids, and I cannot tell you like the difference that we've made in the kids that have come through our program. And I now have kids that have grown up and went through the club, and they now work for me, and they are amazing individuals. We do some really amazing things with our kids and life skills programs. We build bonds with them, and I have kids that come back in and just to pop in and see us that are, adults and I haven't seen, but we made such a difference on their lives that they come back and they're happy that they can still see that, myself, and then I have staff that are amazing that have been around for a really long time as well, and they do amazing things with our kids, and we're just so excited to be able to expand even more and do so many more things with and reach more youth in Tooele. So.
Thank you, Ms. Gorange. Okay, anyone else? I don't blame them. Thank you all for coming here. We'll go ahead and close the public hearing, bring it back for the commission. Do you have any questions, commissioners, that might go to Mr. Pasker?
Commissioner Robinson, I do.
Commissioner
That's
Goches.
okay. I wondered if this is going to accommodate both the teen and the younger population, just this single, is it going to be a single location? You'll no longer be using the skating rink in the Dow James building?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Yes, this will house both programs in the one group.
That's fabulous, and I'm thrilled that the building gets to repurpose, because I'm also an original member of the Sports Mecca from way back, and I also leased that building as a dance instructor, so I was kind of wondering if you're going to keep the dance room. I wondered what the design is going to be on the inside.
Yeah, so I'd be happy to send those along to you. Chris has done a fabulous job putting together some plans, and we've taken the wishes and dreams of both our staff and the kids of everything that they want, and absolutely a dance studio is on there. So it's nice that it's already got the mirrors and the floors and all of that.
Wonderful.
The racquetball courts are being able to be converted to kind of a games area, as well as a half court, you can't have a full half, right? A half court basketball area. So yeah, we'll utilize most of the spaces as they were intended, and then build out classroom spaces and some kitchen space as well. So yeah.
Great. That's exciting. Thank you.
And if you're really interested, I could even send you a walkthrough of the buildings. That's
Thank
kind of
you.
what we're planning it, so.
Wonderful. I would welcome that.
Any other questions from the commissioners? If not, I'm willing to entertain a motion on this item.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Sloan.
I would enthusiastically move we approve the conditional use permit request by Chris Pasker, representing PGAW Architects, to authorize the use of cultural activities and uses and private educational facility to be conducted in the existing commercial structure located at 310 South Main. Application number P22-926, based on the findings, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report dated August 16, 2022.
There's a motion for approval by Commissioner Sloan. The chair will second that motion. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, we'll take it to a vote. Commissioner Hammer.
Aye.
Commissioner Goches.
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan. Aye. Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Jensen.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. That is approved 6-0. Congratulations.
I've never had one motion that's enthusiastic.
You need to come here more often, Mr. Pasco.
As many of us have mentioned, a lot of us go back in that building a long way, and then a lot of us go back with both the Boys and Girls Club and the skating rink. I coached soccer in there 100 years ago, which is not an easy thing to do. So it's a double whammy. Great for the kids and great to repurpose that building that's been sitting there for way too long.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Hey, thank you.
Next on the agenda, public hearing and recommendation on a zoning map amendment request by the city to reassign approximately 9.12 acres of land from MR 25 to MR 20 at approximately 8th North and 100 East. Mr. Bolser.
Thank you. As yet another individual who utilized the sports mecca back in the day, I'm very excited for the decision you've just made as well. But I have another perspective in that I get the benefit of visiting with those kids as they come to City Hall and visit the mayor's office and some of the other offices. And there's some amazing youth, and I'm very glad that they have this opportunity. So I don't do this often, but I will thank you as well for the decision you've just made. Anyway, this zoning map amendment is actually largely a housekeeping measure, and it's one that's generated by the city as opposed to a private applicant. Generally speaking, zoning map amendments are not housekeeping measures, but I'll explain to you why this one really is. The subject site is outlined in red in the center of your screen. This is the Legacy Apartments project that was completed within the last year or so and has been under construction for a little while just to the southeast of Macy's, directly behind Stedman's and some of the other businesses right there along Main Street on the east side of 100 East. The land use on the property is assigned to the high-density residential, as is the properties to the south and northeast. The yellow to the lower right says high-density residential. It's actually medium-density residential. That's an error on my part, with commercial land uses to the west. This map is a lie. It identifies the subject property as MR 25. The reason that I identify it as a lie is because it's for the same reason why this is largely a housekeeping measure. As the commission is aware, a few meetings ago, the city council adopted an ordinance that revised the city code to eliminate the MR 25 zone. So it no longer exists, which means it can't be applied to a piece of property. So technically, this property is actually a hole in the map and not MR 25, which also is why this is a housekeeping measure, because we need to reassign it to a viable zoning district. As current, this is the only property that's been assigned to the MR 25 historically. Since the inception of the MR 25 approximately 3 to 4 years ago, this development, this apartment project, was actually under construction at the time that zoning district was created. There's 12 apartment buildings as well as a clubhouse building in this project, which was originally approved with only 11 buildings because the highest density at that time was the MR 16 zone, which only allows 16 units per acre. That's all they could fit was the 11 buildings and stay under the 16 unit cap per acre. With the adoption of the MR 25 into the city code, they were able to fit the 12th building, which they left room for intentionally in case something should happen that would allow them to construct that. They were approved for a rezone to the MR 25 and eventually got site plan approval and permits and whatnot and constructed the 12th building. As the process has gone on and discussions regarding the creation of the MR 20 zone and the elimination of the MR 25, knowing this was MR 25, we went back into the files and did a calculation on this project as to what its density was. We knew it was significantly below the MR 25, but we didn't know exactly how low, and in fact it's just a shade over 19. So it does comply with the MR 20 that is still in the code, and therefore would allow the project to remain in a conforming state according to zoning. So, as a housekeeping measure, this is the proposed zoning map, simply to reassign this site to the MR 20 zone from the now non-existent MR 25. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bolser. Any questions from the commission on this one? Guess not.
Pretty straightforward.
It's pretty much a slam dunk. Nonetheless, we will open up a public hearing on this item. If there's anyone that wants to come forward and address it, now is your chance to do so. Seeing no rush to the podium, we will go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for any final questions or a motion.
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Hamilton.
I move we forward a positive recommendation to the City Council for the Legacy Apartment Zoning Map Amendment request by Twila City for the Legacy Apartment Zoning Map Amendment, application number P22-899, based on the findings listed in the staff report dated August 18, 2022.
Motion for a positive recommendation from Commissioner Hamilton. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Jensen. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we'll take that to a vote. Commissioner Hammer.
Aye.
Commissioner Gochus.
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan.
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Jensen.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. That moves forward with a positive recommendation, 6-0. Next on the agenda, a recommendation on a W&R minor subdivision request by W&R Enterprises to subdivide approximately 8.6 acres located at the northeast corner of 4th East and 2400 North into 6 commercial lots. Mr. Agard.
Thank you, Commissioners. This minor subdivision involves the undeveloped ground located to the northeast of the intersection of 400 East and 2400 North. Then you have the Lydiard's Furniture Store located to the north, with North Point Medical and some other office uses located to the south. The property currently is zoned general commercial, as are properties to the north, to the west, and to the east, with some industrial service zoning located to the south. Subdivision proposes splitting the 8.6 acre parcel of record into 6 fully platted commercial lots, ranging in size from 1 acre up to 2.1 acres. Each lot easily exceeds the 80-foot lot width requirement of the GC General Commercial Zoning District, as well as the lot size minimums. There will be some frontage improvements installed along 400 East, 600 East, and 2400 North. However, with this being a commercial subdivision, some of those frontage improvements will be installed when each commercial lot develops. These improvements will ultimately complete the entire right-of-way. Staff's recommending approval of this minor subdivision request with the basic housekeeping conditions listed in your staff report. I can't think of anything else to say on it, so I'll turn it back over to you if you have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Agard. Any questions for staff on this item? This one does not require a public hearing, so if there are no further comments or questions, I'll entertain a motion on this from the commission.
Mr. Chairman, I move we forward a positive recommendation to the City Council for the W&R subdivision, minor subdivision request by Wendell Burt, representing W&R Enterprises, LC, to subdivide 8.6 acres into 6 commercial lots located at 400 East, 2400 North, application number P22-38, based on the findings subject to the conditions listed in the staff report dated August 17, 2022.
So motion for a positive recommendation from Commissioner Sloan. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Hamilton and Hammer.
Either or.
Any discussion on that motion? If not, we'll take it to a vote. Commissioner Hammer.
Aye.
Commissioner Gochus.
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan.
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Jensen.
Aye.
Chair also votes aye. That moves forward with a positive recommendation, 6-0. Next on the agenda, a recommendation on the Lexington Greens Lot 107 preliminary subdivision plan request by the Lex Townhomes, the northeast corner of 680 West, 1200 North, into 18 townhome lots in the MR16 zoning district. Mr. Agard.
Thank you, Commissioners. This preliminary subdivision plan applies to the long, narrow parcel highlighted in red on the aerial photograph and is located to the northeast of the intersection of 650 West and Carroll's Way, which is also 1200 North. The Commission may recognize this property as you approved a site plan design review on this property about a month ago. This is the actual beginning of the subdivision process to create those lots. The property is zoned MR16, as are all of the surrounding properties. The preliminary subdivision plan proposes to subdivide the 1.27 acre parcel into 18 townhouse lots. The lots include a footprint of approximately 717 square feet and are 26 feet wide. Each lot is the exact footprint of the townhouse to be constructed above. The MR16 zone does not have lot size minimum restrictions. This is done in order to permit private townhouse ownership, such as that being proposed with this development. The plat also creates limited common areas, these areas being driveways, private patios, areas owned by the development but limited in use to the adjacent homeowner. Common areas are also created with this plat and will be owned and maintained by the development HOA. Common areas include the guest parking lot, stormwater drainage basin, and the surrounding landscaping. Staff has confirmed that the preliminary subdivision plan follows the site plan accurately, and there's no discrepancy between the two plans. Staff is recommending approval of the preliminary subdivision plan with the basic conditions listed in your staff report. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer those for you.
Thank you, Mr. Agard. This item also is just for recommendation without a public hearing, so any questions for staff or discussion, comments from the commission?
Commissioner Robinson, I have some questions.
Commissioner Goches?
This doesn't have anything to do with the subdivision plan request. I'm just wondering, I just need to be reminded, is this area part of the settlement agreement? And do occupancy that is going to enter into this area, does that add to the cap that was listed in the settlement agreement in Overlake? Jim's saying yes. And it would be kind of nice if we could have an update of the occupancy that's down there and how close we're getting to that. Not even close, huh? Okay, I had a few more questions. Pardon me?
I have specifically, but we're not close.
Okay.
We're about 2,200 into 4,800,
Okay.
or maybe 2,100 into 4,800.
I would suggest the number's probably lower, but yeah.
I thought you gave me the number about 2,100, but.
I think we're actually lower than that.
Okay.
I can get you the exact number for you.
Okay. Also, there's a note on here regarding the requirement for water and sewer modeling. Do you know when that is going to be completed, and will that be brought back to the Planning Commission?
I believe that they have already paid the water and sewer modeling fee, otherwise we wouldn't have placed it on the agenda for Planning Commission. When that will be completed is all dependent upon the firm that has been contracted to do that. That will not be brought back to the Planning Commission.
Okay. Another question. The traffic impact. Has there already been a traffic study, and has that already been approved? I just need to be reminded of that.
Yeah, traffic study was done by Lexington Greens when they did the overall master development. This is just a section of that larger development.
Mm-hmm.
And they went through the traffic study at that time, and that was reviewed and considered as part of their zoning map amendment and PUD documents. So it's already been reviewed and completed.
Okay. And is there any word on when that light is going to come in on 1000 North and 600 West, the end of Franks Drive? You know, that area is a very concentrated area for
Okay,
traffic.
Commissioner Goches, that's way off topic for what we've got to approve tonight. So if that's a question, that's fine, but I ask you to take that offline with staff. That really doesn't have much to do with the subdivision plan request.
Well, in my opinion, it's could affect the general welfare of the public, of the residents that are in the adjacent properties. And I've talked to residents that are in Glen Eagle who have concern regarding traffic. They can't get in and out of their subdivision. So in that vein, that was why I asked that question.
Paul, you think you could address that?
UDOT has retained an engineering consultant to look at that and to provide a preliminary design and cost estimate. They're still in that phase. Once we get their report back, then we'll be discussing with the council about how it might be funded or implemented.
Any other questions by the commissioners for the subdivision plan request? If not, I'll entertain a motion on this item. If someone wants to make one.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion.
Commissioner Jensen.
I move we forward a positive recommendation to the City Council for the Lexington Greens Lot 107 preliminary subdivision plan request by Adam Sapers, representing Lex Townhomes LLC for the purpose of creating 18 townhouse lots, application number P22-662, based on the findings and subject to the conditions listed in the staff report dated August 18th, 2022.
Motion for a positive recommendation from Commissioner Jensen. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Commissioner Sloan. Any discussion on that motion? If not, we'll take it to a vote. Commissioner Hammer.
Aye.
Commissioner Goches.
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan.
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton?
Aye.
Commissioner Jensen?
Aye.
Chair also votes aye. That recommendation moves forward with a positive recommendation, 6-0. Next, a decision on the Lex Apartments Series 102B site plan design review request by Ensign Engineering for 10.6 acres located at about 1202 North Franks Drive in the MR16 multifamily residential zoning district. Mr. Agard.
Thank you, Commissioners. This site plan design review involves the 10-acre parcel located east of the previously approved Lex Apartments Phase 1 and is north of Carroll's Way at about 600 West. The property is highlighted in red on the aerial photograph. As mentioned, the property is zoned MR16, as are the surrounding properties, with some R17 residential located directly to the north. The site plan proposes the addition of two 30-unit buildings to the site, the buildings being located closer to the western boundary line, with parking areas located to the east of the buildings and adjacent to Phase 1. Access to the site will be gained from 1300 North and from Carroll's Way, which are both public rights-of-way. The site plan and parking areas have been reviewed and do meet or exceed minimum requirements for building setbacks, parking spaces per unit, guest parking, and covered parking requirements. The site plan proposes that 37% of the site will be landscaped open space and will consist of irrigated sod with plant and shrub beds located closer to the foundations of the buildings. Tree counts and locations along with shrub bed totals have been reviewed and do meet or exceed minimum ordinance requirements. And then building architecture has been reviewed according to the design standards of the Tooele City Code 7-11A. The buildings do meet the requirements for vertical and horizontal variation, and the exterior of the buildings meet or exceed minimum requirements of the ordinance for brick or stone, with the remaining portions of the building exterior being stucco or fiber cement siding. This is the front elevation of the building and contains 60% of the facade, or 61% of the facade as brick. And this is the rear of the building. As you notice, there's a little bit less brick on this facade. And then the side facades meeting the 40% requirement for side facades facing public streets. In total, the amount of brick on the exterior is at 51%, so they do meet the ordinance requirement. The staff report included additional detailed information regarding the site plan, including the amenities, fencing, signage, and so forth. And staff is confident that the proposed development meets or exceeds all of the minimum design requirements as set forth by the multifamily residential design guidelines. And we are recommending approval of the site plan design review with the basic conditions listed in your staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Agard. Any questions for staff on this agenda item? You come up to address something, Mr. Bolzer?
Yeah, during your discussion, I was able to look up some of the numbers on the unit counts under the Overlake Settlement Agreement. As the Commission is aware, that agreement allows a maximum of 4,800 units within the Overlake Settlement area. To date, the number of units that have been entitled or are out, as we call them, out in the field, is approximately 1,000. However, in terms of the number of applications, units covered in applications we have, that pushes us much closer to the number that Mr. Baker referenced earlier. So not to cop out, but I think we were both correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bolzer. If there are no questions or comments on this agenda item, I'll entertain a motion on the decision for this site plan design review.
Chairman, I move we approve the site plan design review request by Ensign Engineering, representing the Lex Apartments LLC for the Lex Apartments Series Lot 102B's development, proposed to be located at approximately 1202 North Franks Drive, application number P21-1191, based on the findings subject to the conditions listed in the staff report dated August 18th, 2022.
I'll second.
Positive motion from Commissioner Sloan and seconded by Commissioner Hammer. Any discussion on the motion? If not, we'll take it to a vote. Commissioner Hammer?
Aye.
Commissioner Gochus?
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan?
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton?
Aye.
Commissioner Jensen?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. That is approved 6-0. Next, the recommendation on the Tooele City Wastewater Collection System Master Plan. Mr. Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This similar presentation was presented to the City Council in their 5:30 meeting with the intent then that it would come back to this body for a recommendation. This is a study that actually began a couple of years ago. It's been delayed for a couple of reasons. The first and foremost being the pandemic hit both our consultant and impacted city staff and ability to get information to them. But a secondary impact was that last summer we had some large rain events that again impacted some residents through the sewer. And so we stopped the process, went back and did some additional study, some more detailed work, and this study is now presented to the city for adoption. There's 7 components and scopes of study within this master plan as shown on your screen and for the public. We look at the existing collection system, flow monitoring, flow characterization, flow projections, the collection system evaluation, operation and maintenance alternatives, and then a capital improvement plan, and I'll explain those in a little bit more detail. The first of these is the existing wastewater collection system. It's a little hard to see on the screen, but there's a number of green lines and then a variety of different colors. Tooele City owns and operates in excess of 170 miles of sanitary sewer pipeline within the city. Those pipe diameters range anywhere from 6-inch to 30-inch in diameter, and we have over 3,300 sanitary sewer manholes that we're responsible to maintain and look at the city. You may have seen this last week or two crews riding around in golf carts or ATV-style vehicles with tools. The city has begun a program where we're doing a more intensive evaluation of our manholes and sewer pipe, and it'll take a 3-year project because of budget. But this year we did the central third part of the city, and that will help us in this management perspective. We also look at the flow monitoring. The green lines represent the variation in flow from a low of 500 gallons a minute to an excess of 4,300 gallons a minute. Because of that fluctuation in the sewer plant, we need to take into consideration all conditions. We can't size a sewer plant for the minimum because what do you do on Thanksgiving and Christmas and the other large events, nor do you want to size it for the peak. Then it sits there unused most of the time. But the red line is the average looking through that for this data period. And according to our Public Works Director, today our average daily inflow is about 2.3 million gallons of effluent that we receive at the plant and treat as an average flow. One of the things we also did in looking at the distribution system, let me clarify, this study is looking at the distribution system, not the treatment plant itself, but the pipes and the manholes and the collection system that we get. We've got quite a variation in that flow as one would expect. You know, it peaks at about 11 o'clock at night and then fluctuates through the day as shown. We also have factors that look at the different types of uses throughout the day. Because of our data, we were able to look at the variations and the characteristics of flow between the industrial flows. The mixed use, which as you well know would be a combination of housing, commercial, retail, other aspects like that. And then we can also look at the residential use, and you can see that they're all unique in how they all play out for us. What we know from this study is that today we have approximately 14,400 equivalent residential units. Our study is showing that that is about 170 gallons per day per home. Now that's down from what it has been in the past, and we believe that's primarily due to water conservation fixtures, washing machines, dishwashers. People are being more efficient. We hope they're still showering and staying clean and doing what they need to. But we are finding that the nature of our society is changing a bit, and that load is dropped to about 170 gallons per day. I mentioned equivalent residential unit. Again, a large user like a car wash or a restaurant, we equate their use also in terms of equivalent residential units. Some uses have hundreds of equivalent residential uses to them. Others, of course, less in what they look at it. The other thing we did is we looked at this project as inflow to the sewer system. Now, one of the advantages we have in Tooele City, well, it's an advantage and a disadvantage, is that our groundwater table is quite deep, several hundred feet deep. We wish it were closer. It would make pumping of water much easier and help development of wells much easier. Nonetheless, we still experience inflow into our sewer system as shown on this graph, and there are some rather significant peaks that have occurred over time. That inflow can come through a combination of roof drains, basement drainage, cooling water discharge. There's a number of connections that tie into our sewer system. What we try to do is identify those and remove as many of those as we can that should not be tied to the sewer system. A roof drain should go to the storm drain. There's different uses for different places. But nonetheless, we have quite a bit of variation in flow. And you'll notice on that graph that you have near the center, that red bar, which occurred in April of 2017, in that we experienced a peak at the water reclamation plant that was nearly 2,000 gallons a minute higher than the average. That's significant. The challenge that poses for us is, again, going to sewer pipe size, how do we anticipate storms? How do we anticipate those peaks and what's going on? What we decided to do for this event was to take that additional peak flow, because we don't know exactly where it's coming from. We believe it's death by 1,000 cuts, a little bit of water getting here, there, a variety of places, and maybe that's a poor analogy. But we took that 2,000 gallons a minute and added that demand throughout the city uniformly as our best estimate to try to make sure that our pipes are sufficiently sized in what we look at it. In that, we also looked at a couple of different factors. We look at the long-term flow variation through population growth. There's a slide coming up, but as you well know, better than most, we have land use and zoning and different uses anticipated for different parts of the city. And we're seeing population growth that is defying still a lot of expectations of what it should be. We have changes in weather. I'm not going to argue the merits of global warming and the causes thereof, simply to say that we are experiencing a change in weather patterns. It does not seem to be as common to get a gentle summer storm that lasts and is refreshing and you want to sit outside on the porch. Rather, we get these very large events that come in, dump on us, and then leave. And it does impact all of our system. And then water conservation, as we talked about, and the variation in flows from Thanksgiving and Christmas. What we were able to do on the projections is take, I believe there's 50 separate areas that we worked with Mr. Bolser and his staff to look at, and they're in the small numbers. You don't need to read them, and they're not really important for this discussion. But we broke the city into all of these separate categories, looking at the land use, what the intended demand might be, and we chose to do a planning period of 40 years. If we were designing a road with a traffic study, we would look at 5 years out. And then you look at 20 years, and then you look at some other period. Because we can't expand a sewer size as easily as you can widen a road, yes, you have to acquire property and do things, we've decided that we want to plan our sewer sizes for 40 years into the future, minimum. And we want to be able to consider what those collection areas, and then we want to be able to see what that does to population growth. The grid shows up very faintly on the screen, but in 2022, our population is nearly 40,000, as according to this graph. It's the slope of the projection is based on the Office of the Governor's population growth estimates. That's the best guess we have. I would have told you, well, you hear me all the time talk about water, how it's going to limit growth. Well, it hasn't yet. It will someday, but until it truly limits growth and we stop seeing this growth, then we'll come back with a revised number and say it's flatter. But in the meantime, we need to plan for what we're seeing as a city and how we're going into it. What this does is it gives us, in that top table, you'll see there's 4 time frames, and it's not a typo that we've listed 2020 2 times. 2020 is when, again, this study started with the delays we talked about. And based on that number, we had the 14,400 ERUs. That 2020 should probably, in a final edit, and this would be to the council as well, be updated to 2022, because that number of 15,627 includes every development that the city has approved and is waiting to be built upon. We are accountable to provide the system for what we approve and what we can build on. And then you've got 2030 and 2060 moving out. And you can see what that does to our population and growth. If you look at the flow projections, existing conditions in this chart are about 2.4 MGD, as is indicated. And we project that based on the 40-year growth, that it could expand significantly up to as much as 4.2 to 7 million gallons per day of effluent treatment. The city is ongoing with the council's support to expand our reclamation plant. We've made several upgrades already. We have another project in the works. So it's things we're continually working on to meet that capacity and take it into place. This study summarized, and it basically found that we only have 5 areas in town where we have pipelines that are undersized when we look at our planning horizon requirements. E1 is at the intersection of 1000 North and Main. E2 is along 600 North between 100 West and 370 West. E3 is along Coleman from Utah Avenue north to McKellar. And then E4 is from the old sewer plant down to 1000 North and down to 600 West area. It's actually west of 600, 1100 West. Those lines are lines that will need to be upsized, and we will begin working on how do we fund them and what's the timing appropriateness, what is the priority so that we can take those into place. I mentioned the delay in getting the report out. E2 and E3 are projects that were added because of the additional study and based upon the sewer increased flow that we had last summer. So that's something that's in this plan that we'll be looking at. F1 is clear up at the reclamation plant. On this image, you don't even see it because of its scale. It is the last section of pipe that heads into the headworks building, the first treatment process at the reclamation plant. That is undersized for future growth, but the council has authorized us to begin the design of a replacement headworks facility which would take care of that one. So that one's already in works to be taken care of. As we look at those future flow deficiencies, again, that F1 is the one that we really talk to. We also then in this master plan have a cost summary for those 4 projects plus the F1 existing. If you look at that total on there, you're about $8.5 million in today's dollars. It would not surprise me as we see those costs go up exponentially. The projects the city has put out for bid recently are frustrating. That's probably the most kind word I can use in a public meeting to try to watch and see what's happening. These costs have been estimated. We've asked our engineer to include a 25% contingency because none of them are designed, none of them have been put out for bid, none of them have been managed yet, and I fully anticipate still that these costs will be conservative. Tonight, we're just asking your support to forward this on to the City Council for formal action. We would anticipate doing that at the first City Council meeting in September. We have already sent a draft copy of this report to our financial consultant for evaluation so that it can begin looking at potential impact to sanitary sewer impact fees for the distribution portion. And then a next step, as with the water, would be, does it change our water revenue requirements? And does it change our sanitary sewer revenue requirements and go from there? I believe you were all provided a copy or a link to the full document. It's fascinating reading, and I encourage you to read every word of it, including the appendices. But we wanted to give you a very general summary, but happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Anyone have questions that they want to direct towards Paul?
I have a question, Commissioner.
Commissioner Goches.
I did read through it. I didn't read it word for word, but, of course, I've been
Had to
familiar.
keep waking up, didn't you? Yes.
I've been familiar with the document for a while, but,
Yes.
I do have concern over some existing deficiencies. You know, there's always going to be a need for improvement. You know, I know that we've had the large rain events and that there are areas in town that experience flooding because there's no storm drain. And I've talked with you about, you know, some areas. I've talked with the mayor. We've looked at the maps. There is no storm drain in some certain areas that are, you know, in this map. What do we do to address some of those existing deficiencies?
That's a separate document. That would be storm drain. This is sanitary sewer. So we really don't want storm drain going into these lines. But the storm drain is something that we've had discussions with the administration about revisiting that, looking at that again. We've updated the water in this one. We've updated the transportation. We believe that one's probably one of the next ones to look at. And then we can again take and tackle some of those projects. The city does have funding for stormwater projects, and we're putting those projects in place in the areas that have the most financial impact to our residents and the most financial impact to traffic. We've done some projects nearly every year for the last several years and more planned. And the ones we've spoken about, Ms. Gochis, are some that are on that list, and we're trying to fit those in with, you know, making sure that we put the money where it's most impactful and reduces the liability to the city. But we have those on our list.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Sloan.
Paul, understanding that you're somewhat constrained, I mean, you can only study your own boundaries. But as I think we're all aware, one of the 800-pound gorillas in our storm drain is potential annexation.
Correct.
Are the engineers aware of that possibility, and are they able to factor, if not completely factor that future in, because you don't know what it's going to look like? But you know, the one that jumps out at me is the first is 1000 North and Main Street.
Right.
You know, directly east of that, 10 blocks. You're looking at
The answer is we've already done that.
Okay.
Now, it's not included in this master plan because it's not part of the current city.
Exactly.
However, the developer hired the city's consultant who had the mapping and all the information to look at the impact of their sanitary sewer system, and we have a separate report.
Awesome.
So as that issue moves forward through the city process to consider annexation, that information is available, and then if that property were to become annexed, we would adopt that by appendix to this master plan, but we've already looked at that.
That's one specific one. I'm assuming all of the annexation areas that we have, even if we don't have specific applications right now, the engineers are aware of the potential possibility. We're going out 40 years.
Right.
It's
We've not looked at anything that is in the annexation growth plan specifically, except for those that have come forward with specific applications. We believe that to try to speculate who might annex, when they might annex, what they would annex as, is a little bit cumbersome, and it actually puts the burden on the city to fund.
Sure.
Our preference is to do the best we can to plan with what we know, and then as developers want to annex, let them be the ones that fund the cost of the studies and see what that impact would be. So yes, we look at it, but with a little bit of a cautious eye.
Just kind of keeping it off to the side.
It's always present, absolutely always present.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Hanson? Thank you very much.
Thank you. With your recommendation, we'll take this to the city council for formal action then in
Okay.
September.
Does someone want to make a motion for a positive recommendation on this item? Well, geez, I'll just do it. I move we forward a positive recommendation to the city council for the water sewer plan. And there's my motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Hamilton. Any discussion on that motion? If not, we'll take it to a vote. Commissioner Hammer?
Aye.
Commissioner Gochis?
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan? Aye. Commissioner Hamilton?
Yes.
Commissioner Jensen?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. That moves forward 6-0 with a
Thank you,
positive
Commissioner.
recommendation.
Thank you for your help.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Next on the agenda are council reports. Councilmember Manzione, welcome.
Thanks. It's good to be back. Sorry I missed a couple of meetings. I don't have a lot for you tonight. One zoning update. We did approve the zoning request for the property at 600 East and 2500-ish North. It changed, it has commercial, if you remember, and then some high density and then medium density, and the change allowed for a little bit more cascading into the medium density residential rather than just abrupt changes. So that was the zoning change. And then, of course, in our last meeting, we did adopt our tax rate and final budget. So those were the hot topics, I guess, the last couple of meetings. That's all I have for you, unless you have questions for me.
Thank you. Any questions for Councilmember Manzione? I have one question. Isn't that annexation that was referenced by Commissioner Sloan, when does that come before you guys?
In
Isn't it soon?
September, first, I think the first meeting in September.
Okay, so it's quick. Okay.
Just for the public hearing, not for approval.
Public hearing. Okay.
Because there are the 17 million steps.
Right,
if
there's a
you remember.
bazillion. The first, okay. The first public hearing.
16 million? 6 million, he says.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, training on non-conforming uses and non-complying structures.
Chairman,
Oh, sorry.
I wonder, is it appropriate to move training to the very end, do minutes, adjourn, and then do training? So that could excuse our minute taker?
We could do that. Yes, let's do that then.
You need a motion for that?
Do you need a motion
Yes,
to
why don't you
amend
just
the
give me a motion
agenda
for
in
that?
that?
That, I will take that as a motion to do that.
Okay.
Second.
And seconded by Commissioner Sloan, so we'll take that, if there any discussion on that. If not, we'll take it to a vote. Commissioner Hammer?
Aye.
Commissioner Gochus?
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan?
Aye.
Commissioner Hamilton?
Aye.
Commissioner Jensen?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Let's rearrange things.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go to
In
the,
the minutes by the minute taker.
yep, let's go to the minutes first. So review and approval of the minutes for the meeting held on August 10th, 2022. Any discussion on those minutes?
I move to approve those minutes if there are no changes or additions.
Okay, motion to approve by Commissioner Hammer. Is there a second? I'll second it. Any discussion on that? Okay, Commissioner Hammer?
Aye.
Commissioner Gochus?
I was excused from that meeting. I've read the minutes and watched the replay, so do you want my
Yes, I want your
vote?
vote.
My vote is aye.
Okay, Commissioner Sloan?
Ditto.
Commissioner Hamilton?
Aye.
Commissioner Jensen?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Those minutes are approved. Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
We are adjourned. We'll excuse Kat, and then we'll get on to fund training on non-conforming uses and non-complying structures.
Wow, sewer planning and training is awesome.
Thank you.
I
Mr.
figured she'd
Bolser.
want to know about this. Non-conforming uses and non-complying structures. This seems to be a fairly straightforward topic. I'm going to show you why it's not. This is, I think it's fair to say this is probably a topic that's a bit of a thorn in our sides day to day, and how to deal with certain things. But it's also fairly clear on how we deal with them at the same time. You often hear me in trainings and other topics refer to various provisions of city code and land use law as a dealer's choice, however we want to handle it. This is one area that is pretty uniform, city to city, non-conforming uses and non-complying structures. And it's not one that you will see a lot of discrepancy, both in the language, but also what the language says, and also how different cities deal with non-conforming uses and non-complying structures. So this is probably a training that I could drop into any city and do and not really have to change my presentation much, if at all, but we'll do it anyway. I actually appreciate this topic because I think it's the first time we've done this one here. So it was a new idea, but it's a good one to know because you guys do get to deal with it. So what is a non-conforming use? Anyone know?
Would it be used for a business that's already established and the zoning's changed in that area?
Very simply, you're correct. The simple definition is a use that legally existed at the time it was established, where the regulation of that use has since changed to no longer allow that use. There's a relatively inappropriate term that goes along with it that people use fairly often that I won't use. If you want to know why, I'll talk to you afterwards. But the legal non-conforming or pre-existing non-conforming is the actual term for what we're talking about. Very simply, you existed first, you're allowed to stay. How the state code defines it is in 109A103 of the state code, which says a non-conforming use means a use of land that legally existed before its current land use designation, has been maintained continuously since the time the land use ordinance governing the land changed, and because one or more subsequent land use ordinance changes does not conform to the regulation now governing, it says govern, but governing the use of land. A lot of words there, but basically exactly what our simplistic definition stated. And then in comparison, Tooele City Code Section 731 defines a non-conforming use as the use of a building, structure, or land which is prohibited by any zoning, building, or other regulatory ordinance, but which lawfully existed prior to the effective date of such ordinance. So 3 different versions of how to say it, all 3 say the same thing. So what about a non-complying structure? What's that?
Same thing, but a building.
Building doesn't go where it's approved to go nowadays.
Perfect. Same thing, but you're dealing with a building now instead of use. A structure that legally existed at the time it was established, where the regulations applicable to that structure has since changed to render the structure no longer compliant. Well, compliant with what? Anything. State code's definition in 109A103, non-complying structure means a structure that legally existed prior to the structure's current land use designation and because of one or more subsequent land use ordinance changes does not conform to the setback, height restriction, or other regulations, excluding those regulations which govern the use of land. So, any regulations specific to the building, setbacks, height, etc., it existed first before that change. Very similarly, again in 731 of the City Code, our definition reads that a non-complying structure is a structure or building regulated by, but not in compliance with uniform building codes, but which was legally constructed prior to the effective date of such codes. So does the uniform building codes mean simply the IBC, the International Building Code by which you build? I would say no, because it complies in the same manner as a building code for setbacks, height restrictions, etc., as more specifically listed in the state code. So again, 3 definitions, 3 different ways of saying the same thing. Now, non-conforming uses and non-complying structures. If the use or structure were legally established, why does this matter now? What do you think?
There could be code problems, there could be changing with the land use, there could be changing with conditional uses.
Safety, fire.
A whole bunch of different reasons why things that happened 100 years ago don't fly now.
Exactly.
I run into them when I'm trying to sell something that was built 100 years ago.
Right.
Like specifically Newtown.
Yes.
That was in my mind.
Yeah, very simply, there is a regulatory and legislative reason why the change was made. It could be life, health, safety. It could be a very large range of things. But for a reason, it's no longer allowed. But we can't take away the right for what's already there to stay there. So that's why this becomes a very important matter to deal with and have in our ordinance for how we need to deal with these sorts of situations. So there's basically 3 areas of concern when it comes to dealing with these: maintenance and repair, restoration or changes, and discontinuance or abandonment of the use or structure. As long as it's existing, its sheer existence doesn't cause concern. But what we see most often are one of these 3 things. Okay? So, moving forward. What does Utah State Code say when it comes to these areas? The easy thing is the state code actually breaks them down individually. Okay? So, what does Utah State Code allow? Section 109A 511 sub 1 specifies that a non-conforming use or non-complying structure may be continued by the present or future property owner, right? So as long as it's existing as it is, they get to keep doing it, right? A non-conforming use may be extended through the same building provided no structural alteration of the building is proposed or made for the purpose of the extension, okay? So basically that means it can exist within the structure, but you can't expand a non-conforming use, right? Can't go beyond the structure that it's in. So you couldn't have, if you had a non-conforming use within a building, you couldn't add on to the building to widen the scope of that use. Does that make sense? Okay.
Question.
Fire away.
Does it work the opposite way? I'm thinking of a building that's a non-conforming use being used, for example, as a fiveplex. Could it be altered to create a fourplex without changing the non-conforming use? If
Yes.
it's non-conforming use in the
Yes.
first place.
It changes very simply, and I'm going to address this now because I don't address it in the presentation. But a non-conforming use can be amended so long as it's amended towards compliance.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Jim, the non-conforming use, those are legitimate uses, not conditional uses, correct?
Any allowed use,
Conditional
any
uses.
permissible use that existed prior. Okay?
I'd like to answer
Please do.
Matt's question. A non-conforming use is a prohibited use that we still allow because it pre-existed the regulation.
Okay.
All right. So what does the state code allow cities to do about this? Well, very simply, in 10.9A 511 sub 2, it says that a legislative body, which means that they can adopt an ordinance that says these sorts of things, legislative body may provide for the establishment, restoration, reconstruction, extension, alteration, expansion, or substitution of nonconforming uses upon the terms and conditions set forth in the land use ordinance. It also specifies that the termination of all nonconforming uses except billboards by providing a formula establishing a reasonable time period during which the owner can recover or amortize the amount of his investment in the nonconforming use, if any, and the termination of a nonconforming use due to its abandonment. Okay? That's what we're allowed to do by adopting our own ordinance when it comes to nonconforming uses and non-complying structures. So basically, we can establish by what means they can continue, they can amend, they can adjust, they can rebuild, by what means they can be eliminated via an amortization process, or by what means they can simply be terminated because they no longer are there. They've abandoned the use or structure. Okay? So what does the code say cities cannot do? This is always the fun one, right? Subsection 3 of that same section says that a municipality may not prohibit the reconstruction or restoration of a non-complying structure or terminate the non-conforming use of a structure that is involuntarily destroyed in whole or in part due to fire or other calamity unless the structure or use has been abandoned. Okay? So we get nasty storm that picks up Dorothy and little Toto in their home and takes it away. It was a non-conforming home, they get to rebuild it. They do not get a blank check to rebuild it. They can rebuild it to the same size that it was. Makes sense? But they do get the right to rebuild it.
Is there a time frame or anything on that? Like, what if they wait 10 years and
I
decide to
believe it
rebuild
would fall to the same clause as abandonment, if I'm not mistaken, but good question, though.
Jim, we have a very recent example of that in Tooele. When I noticed the 7-Eleven, the new 7-Eleven sign going up, I hurried and asked Andrew, and he said, yeah, it was destroyed by a natural weather event and rebuilt to the same dimensions, so they get to do it.
Yeah, ironically, I can nail it down to almost to the day, 23 years ago when there was a tornado that went through downtown Salt Lake. It went through some older structures and homes in the avenues. This was one of the things that Salt Lake City dealt with to a certain degree. Some of those homes were built a little closer to property lines than current ordinance allows, but they were required to allow, and they didn't resist it, but they were required to allow reconstruction to the scale prior to that natural disaster event. So there are definitely a number of examples that can be drawn upon, even here locally, as Mr. Baker mentioned, that where these provisions of restoration are fully in play.
I have a question, Mr.
Yeah.
Bolster. So the three-story building, the old hotel that was up in Newtown, would you guys consider that have been abandoned, even though it was destroyed by a natural calamity?
Yeah, that was a building that was determined to be abandoned quite
a while.
Well before that. However, being as the structure itself was still standing prior to the fire, and there were plans for adequate redevelopment, we would be required to allow it to be redeveloped.
Same size and.
Yeah, it would be redeveloped as is. They were going to renovate the interior, leave the shell, of course, intact. But now with the unsafe nature of it having to come down post-fire, the abandonment was already in place. And so and certainly post-fire now, the time has passed that even if it wasn't abandoned, it is now. All right. Let's see, I think we just did that one, did we not? Oh, no, we didn't. Yeah, no, this is more of the same, sorry. This is addition to the section. A municipality may prohibit the reconstruction or restoration of a non-complying structure or terminate the non-conforming use if the structure is allowed to deteriorate to a condition that the structure is rendered uninhabitable, getting to your question you just addressed, Commissioner Jensen, and is not repaired or restored within 6 months after written notice that the structure is uninhabitable and that the non-complying structure or non-conforming use will be lost if not repaired or restored within 6 months. Or that the property owner has voluntarily demolished a majority of the non-complying structure or building that houses the non-conforming use. Okay, so if either of those exist, we can consider it done. So, how does the state code determine abandonment? Subsection 4 reads that unless the municipality establishes by ordinance a uniform presumption of legal existence for non-conforming uses, the property owner shall have the burden of establishing the legal existence of a non-complying structure or non-conforming use through substantial evidence, which may not be limited to municipal or county records. Also, any party claiming that a non-conforming use has been abandoned shall have the burden of establishing the abandonment. That's right in the state code. The classic example that, in fact, Mr. Baker and I have talked about briefly this afternoon, animal rights. We've had horses there for generations. Well, they haven't been there for a while. Well, whose burden is it? This tells us. State code. State code says it's the property owner. If for instance, the city was saying, hey, you brought those horses back, you've abandoned that use, you can't have them there. Comes the property owner, burden under the first clause. If a third party is saying, hey, they can't have that there, it's their burden under this provision, subsection 4. Okay? I do believe that there's certain inabilities on the part of even cities in enforcement actions to really comply with this and have adequate records, just because of, well, what if it was one day that a horse was back over the course of a year? Does that, how do you prove that it was or it wasn't there? You know, it seems fairly simple to say who has the responsibility, but the burden can be quite cumbersome. And I've actually seen that through my career as well, and I could give you some very boring examples, but it is a very cumbersome burden, actually.
Usually I recommend my clients, they take a lot of pictures of their animals on their property date code, just for future reference.
Yes, and that argument can be extrapolated out to even a picture a day, you know, over the course of a year says that they were there all year. Or a picture a month says that they were there at least one day a month. But even then, making sure you document what day you took the picture, where you took the picture, you know, what piece of property it is, this sort of thing, to make sure that your documentation is adequate evidence. All right. What does the state code determine about abandonment? Again, it continues on to say that abandonment may be presumed to have occurred if a majority of the primary structure associated with a nonconforming use has been voluntarily demolished without prior written agreement with the municipality regarding an extension of the nonconforming use, or the use has been discontinued for a minimum of 1 year. This is where your photographs come into play. Or The primary structure associated with the non-conforming use remains vacant for a period of 1 year, and the property owner may rebut the presumption of abandonment and has the burden of establishing that any claimed abandonment has not occurred. This is where Commissioner Sloan's advice to his clients comes in very key. But again, it's a minimum of 1 year, so 1 day starts that clock over. All right? So what does our code say? That's what the state code says. What does our code say? Our code actually, the state code lumps these two topics together. Ours have both addressed in the same chapter, but we actually have different sections that address them individually. So first, for non-conforming uses, on the topic of maintenance and repair, Section 735 says that a non-conforming use of land existing at the time that the land use ordinance applicable to land changed so as to prohibit the use may be continued, provided that the land is used for such non-conforming use at least 30 days in each calendar year, and the non-conforming use is in no way expanded or extended either on the same or adjoining property. Okay, sound familiar? Regarding restoration and changes to the use, Section 736 says simply that a non-conforming use, if changed to a conforming use, may not thereafter be changed back to a non-conforming use. So once, because you've eliminated the non-conforming use by making it conforming, you don't get to go back, right? Superman's not going backwards around the earth and reversing the rotation of the earth to turn back time, right? That's a great old movie reference. Can a non-conforming use be changed to a different non-conforming use? What do you think?
No.
It's already non-conforming, so it's still non-conforming after you change it. Think so?
No.
I see a majority of no's. You're correct, you can't. Each non-conforming use plays by itself. So discontinuance and abandonment. 737 of the City Code specifies that any non-conforming use of land is discontinued for a period of 1 year, or if the non-conforming use does not satisfy the requirements of Chapter 7.3, any future use of the land shall conform to the provisions of the zone in which the land is located. Further, upon allegation of discontinued operation or non-conforming use of a non-complying structure, discontinued use of a non-conforming use of land, or other failure to comply with Chapter 7.3, the owner of the structure or land shall have the burden to establish compliance with that same chapter. In any non-complying structure, if any non-complying structure remains unoccupied or unused for a period of 1 year, or if the non-complying structure does not satisfy the requirements of Chapter 7.3, any future use of the building shall conform to the provisions of the zone in which the structure is located.
We should try and make that a little more wordy.
I'm trying. Believe it or not, I actually took little pieces out to make it fit on this slide, but it's a lot of, the irony is it's a lot of words, but it's words that have to be in there because we've got to address the various aspects here. So with maintenance and repair, 735 says that a non-conforming structure or use thereof existing at the time the ordinance became effective may continue to exist provided that the building or structure is occupied or utilized for at least 30 days each calendar year. The floor space of the building or structure is not increased. No structural alterations are made to the building or structure except as provided in Title VII, and any non-conforming use of the building or structure not extend beyond the floor area of the building or structure. Okay? Make sense? And then a non-conforming structure may be maintained and repaired subject to the provisions of Chapter 7.3. I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again. You know why? Because our ordinance matches, right? Okay, restoration and changes. City Code 734, a non-complying structure may be reconstructed and restored after the structure has been involuntarily destroyed in whole or in part due to fire or other calamity. Have you heard that before? And that a non-conforming use of a non-complying structure that is involuntarily destroyed in whole or in part due to fire or other calamity may resume and continue that use upon reconstruction or restoration of the structure.
Jim?
Yes, sir.
Just a matter of historic interest. This version of the city statute and the state statute are relatively new. the state and city statutes used to read that if a building was destroyed by no more than 50% of its value, it could be rebuilt. But if it were 51% of its value, all bets are off, it's a wreck, you couldn't rebuild it. So the state law changed, and we had to change our ordinance to match it, which is what we just looked at. If it's involuntarily destroyed 100%, they get to rebuild it. That's new.
Discontinuance and abandonment regarding structure, 734, reads that a non-complying structure may not be reconstructed or restored, and a non-conforming use of a non-complying structure may not be resumed or continued if, at the time the structure is destroyed in whole or in part, just as Mr. Baker just referenced, in whole or in part, it has been unoccupied or unused for 1 year, or the structure has been allowed to deteriorate to a condition that the structure is rendered uninhabitable and is not repaired or restored to a state of habitability within 6 months upon written notice to the property owner. And I won't read the rest because it says the same thing. It goes on to state that the property owner has voluntarily demolished a majority of the structure or the building that houses the non-conforming use. So that is when discontinuance or abandonment has occurred, when any of those things exist. Okay? So, a little self-check. How well does the city code meet the requirements and allowances of the state code? What do you think?
Looks like 100%.
Absolutely.
Spoken like a true
99.9.
We are right in line with the state code. And I would go so far as
One
to
word
say
is
that
off.
we may be off by a word or two, but other than that, they're not the important ones. They're the ands and the
And
ifs.
and
But I would go on to say that the vast majority of city codes, actually, we could say the same thing about. As I mentioned when I started, this is a topic that is pretty uniform amongst the cities, as well as the state code, because it's really one, the state code is pretty clear on what you can and can't do, but also it's a fairly common sense approach to it, believe it or not. So yeah, we're right in line as are most cities. Now, there's a mystery third topic here. Okay, you knew I had to throw a curveball in there.
Is it another movie?
No.
Okay.
The mystery third topic is illegal uses. Okay? All of the topics we've been talking about, non-conforming and non-complying structures, were legal at one time, right? They had to be legally established. All those definitions that I read 3 and 4 times, they all were legally established before the regulation changed. What if they were never legally established at all before or after the ordinance change? What if they were illegal uses? Let's say, for instance, we had a single-family home that without building permits became an 8-family home. Never was legal, never had permits. It's not permitted in the zone before or after. So what do we do with those?
Illegal is illegal. That's a different
Illegal
ballgame then.
is illegal, yeah. What if the structure was never legal when it was established, or the use? Illegal is illegal, plain and simple. Before anything further can be done, they have to be legal first. They have to come into compliance, whether it's the use or the structure. Okay? Very simple. Now, there's mystery fourth topic. There's one thing we haven't addressed in this. What if the lot itself is non-conforming? We've talked about the use, we've talked about the structure. What about the property it's on? What if that is non-conforming? Here's what I mean. Okay, what if the lot was not legally established? And I'd go so far as to say, even if it was legally established. Here's the example. This is a parcel map, and I zoomed in intentionally so it's a little bit blurry so that you can't identify where here in town it is. Many of you will probably be able to tell the general area that it is, but nonetheless.
I could guess.
You can see a lot of small parcels, but you'll notice all but one are combined with another one to create a larger parcel. I've outlined those in red, okay? The two on the left are 2 long, narrow parcels that have been commonly used and associated under same ownership for a single use, right? They both have a home on it with yards, etc. The larger one on the right obviously was a conforming one, but it's separate from the others. So what about this guy? Okay, just for detail purposes, this is an R17 zone. That lot is 40 feet wide. Okay, it's insufficient by zoning by 20 feet. It's 115 feet deep, which makes it 4,600 square feet, which is 2,400 square feet below the minimum allowed by ordinance. But this is a lot that is older than all of us. Okay, anyone in the room, this lot is older than us. Okay, so what do we do with this thing?
I'm selling it to one of the two houses on either side of it.
What if they don't buy it?
That's going to sit. I'm going to put a tiny house on it.
Parking lot. We need more parking.
Youth garden.
Youth gardens? Yeah. So what do we do with this thing? And I'll tell you this example. I've been dealing with a real estate agent that wants to try to sell this to somebody to build something on. What do I tell him? This is very clearly a non-conforming lot to the zone, but it has no non-conforming use. It has no non-complying structure on it. And it's existed prior to the R17 zone and probably many other zoning tenants of the city.
Well, if you're going to
So what do we
build
do
on
with
it, then you shouldn't be allowed to unless it's conforming, because you're adding.
So you're suggesting that we remove the property owner's right to build something on here if they can?
Yes, I'll do that.
Okay. Mr. Baker, your thoughts on that?
Did you feel that, Bus?
Well, state law does not address non-conforming properties.
That's why I'm bringing it up, by the way.
And city law does not define non-conforming properties. So there, in the state of Utah, there is no law that addresses this fact scenario. So I don't have an exact answer for you, but there are two ways to go. One is to look at it by analogy with a non-conforming use or structure and say, because it pre-exists, because it was lawful when it was subdivided, you can go ahead and build on it. But if you go that route, how do you decide what the new setback will be for that lot? One way you can look to guidance is to see what neighboring properties might have, but here you don't have neighbors to look at. So the other direction to go is simply to say, no, you cannot build on this property because it cannot comply with current regulations, similar to where you're going, Commissioner Hamilton, that because you're going to do something new now, it has to conform. And in that event, then you have to do what Commissioner Sloan has suggested, sell it to one side or the other, or split it down the middle and sell half to each neighbor. And that's how you get your economic use out of it. I don't have a good answer, but that's two ways you could go.
Now, in fairness,
what do you think, Mr. Bolser?
I agree with that. I do agree with that. I also believe there's an avenue, if you're real creative, you might be able to do something with this, even as small as it
A
is.
shotgun style property.
Yeah,
would fit
you'd
on
have
that
to be
property.
real creative, but I think there's
Go
a
to
chance
New
you
Orleans,
could
they're all
do
over
it.
the place.
Now, I will tell you, that was an excellent answer by Mr. Baker, one, because he's that good. Number two, it wasn't truly a blindside, because he and I kind of discussed this a little bit earlier. But,
you were going to call him.
that piece of it was blindside, but no, we did have a little bit of conversation, so I'm not being quite as mean as it sounded. But. So yeah, that's an interesting one, right? There isn't even law for this. Good one to think about, right?
That's not the only one that fits that example.
Oh, no.
There's a ton of
No.
them in that.
Yeah,
general
there are a number of weirdness issues like this out there for sure, and that, not just to our community. But these are the fun things that walk in our door from time to time during the day.
So, Mr. Bolser,
Yes.
if somebody comes to you with this same question and you suggest a solution and they don't want to use your solution, then, is there a time frame that the city has to make a decision on a request like this? Do they have to legally request? How does the landowner approach the city on this dilemma?
Well, generally speaking, when you have oddities like this, we've been fortunate that typically they come in and ask questions before they've made commitments, because they recognize this is odd. And a credit to Mr. Commissioner Sloan and his field of study. His compadres have realized to recognize this sort of thing and say, wait a minute, this one's a little bit weird. We better ask some questions before we start getting too far down the road or too deep into this. And so it's not uncommon that, particularly with weird things like this, or oddities, I should say, we have very preliminary conversations first before they really get into formal applications. Things like this one are odd enough, and I use this one specifically because it's a little further down the odd track than some of them that come in. Unfortunately, a lot of people get scared off by the oddities of it once they kind of realize what some of the possible solutions are. And we're very careful not to tell them what they need to do, but to give them options. You could potentially look at this, you could potentially look at this, but you need to keep in mind this set of, whatever this box is, this set of things. And then we let them go do their own due diligence rather than say, you need to do this. And then when they come back to us with another idea or a formal application, then we address it at that point. But this property has sat like this for generations, could sit for generations more. And the same scenario will play out unless law changes. So not really a direct answer to your question, but it's more an explanation of our approach when these things come up. Hopefully that helps. Okay? Always a fun one, right? The mystery last question. Questions and discussion. What other questions do you have? This is a pretty straightforward topic, but it's one that a lot of people don't understand. And it's one that's a little bit nuanced, but it's one that's pretty universal. So what can I answer for you?
Can you send us your slides?
Absolutely.
Some people might not want them.
Absolutely, I can. Anything else?
Thank you. I think it's awesome.
That's interesting.
Okay.
Very challenging. I like it.
Before you leave, make sure you sign the training roster. And we have a 5th Wednesday next week, so we will see you in 3 weeks. Yes, and we will have a new commissioner appointed by then. I understand from the mayor she's made a selection, and we'll be proposing that to the council for appointment in 2 weeks at their meeting on the 7th. Okay.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Jim, I'll get you standing in front of me.
Sure.
Let me see if I can quote you.
I think Chris should buy that, build a garage on it, and let me store all my stuff in it.
I actually was thinking about that, how the single car, 100-foot deep garage with the ADU on top, the apartment on top.
I'll give you an even better scenario, one that was actually on that piece of property that was brought up as a subsequent conversation with the same real estate agent. Had someone who wanted to build a long, deep garage, normal garage, but it was deep, with basically a front door next to it, to a what they called a bonus room, but it was just a long hallway that ran the length of the building, that a client of theirs that were effectively snowbirds could pull their RV into the garage, live in the RV, but have it under a structure, and the RV became the residential unit. And we said, well, unfortunately, that creates a non-conforming use of the land as an accessory building to the use of the residential
I was just going to build
mobile
an
home.
apartment up above the back of the garage.
Again, creative.
Kitchen and a room, right?
I give them a ton of credit for being creative and trying to find a solution for an odd piece of property, but unfortunately that one didn't quite work.
Stairwell to the top with the toilet, shower, and all that upstairs. Yeah, you're good.
You mentioned Utah Land Use Institute. Speaker Wilson last year pushed through some legislation to do some training for a series of land use workshops designed to help elected officials, city staff, and community leaders better understand land use law and smart growth practice in Utah. They say they're going to be hosted all over the state. The first 2 are this week. One is tomorrow in Davis County, the next one is in Weber County the following day. They tell us they're going to, I don't know if they're going to get out to us, but they're going to get somewhere close. And I'm sure Roger and Jim see those, they'll let us know those things. But that was kind of designed in a lot of ways with planning and zoning commissioners in mind. So if we get an opportunity for that, that might be worth your time.
Not a virtual option, though. Have to be in person.
I don't recall it being a virtual version.
I think it was in person.
Yeah. I will say, while you're looking for that with tonight's meeting, all of our commissioners have met their 4 hours of training for the year. So good job. Doesn't mean you're off the hook for the rest of the year, Just means you guys are overachievers and you got it done before the end of the year. Thank you. Have a good evening.